Okay, folks, I think the numbers are climbing. We're almost there. I'm very, very sorry. We had a technical difficulty. We actually ended up having to create another link, but then the old one came back on. In the meantime, I did get to eat my lunch, so thank you so much. I'd like to welcome today Anne Graham, CEO of the NTA. That's the National Transport Authority, and Brendan O'Brien, who is our head of transport department for Dublin City Council. He is also the head of the COVID mobility group that had been set up during COVID times as well. So without further ado, thank you both for coming today. We are talking about transport and the city in Dublin City, of what is happening right now in terms of transport, in terms of sustainable transport, and in terms of the difficulties as well we're having. So I'm going to kick in with Anne first for a few minutes about what she does and what the NTA does, and specifically Dublin projects. And also then I'm going to go into talk to you, Brendan, and we'll go straight into questions. So folks, keep your questions coming. We'll try to go through as much of them as possible during this chat. We'll ask both panelists to answer, or if I have answers for you, I'll answer as well. And anything that doesn't get answered, please send it in to us at lordmayor@dublincity.ie. We'll try to get an answer for you. And so we'll try to answer as much as possible, but lordmayor@dublincity.ie if we don't get them done. Okay, so Anne, tell us a bit about you and what does the NTA do?
Okay, well, thanks very much for the
invitation.
invitation.
Oh, sorry, one last thing, Anne. This session is being recorded for everyone. So when we put out your questions, we'll just use your first names only. We won't breach any GDPR. So Anne, sorry, back to you.
No problem. And thanks very much for the invitation to talk today about mobility in the city, and just focusing in particular on what the NTA does and our role in terms of mobility around the Dublin region. And I suppose our key role is around developing a long-term strategy for the movement of people and goods around the Dublin region. And that's as a statutory function, because originally we were going to be considered as a Dublin Transport Authority, but we took on some other national roles. But our key focus, I suppose, and our key role is about strategic transport planning. And we have a transport plan in place for the Greater Dublin area. It was approved by the Minister then in 2016 out to 2035. But we're also statutorily required to review that every 6 years. So we've just commenced that review of the transport strategy, because naturally enough, we have to take into account what changes there could be in demographics, in employment, etc. And so we're looking at and the 20-year strategy now from 2022 onwards, taking into account, particularly our climate change objectives, and trying to ensure that by producing, a lot more in terms of sustainable transport infrastructure, that we can affect change such that we will see the emissions and carbon emissions in terms of transport beginning to fall. So we've lots of projects, as you know, underway in planning under the current Greater Dublin Area Strategy. And the three big projects are Metrolink, Bus Connects and DART Plus. So Metrolink, at the moment, the design works are complete, and the business case has gone to the Department of Transport, and we would be hoping that we will get government approval to commence the planning process for Metrolink later on this year. DART Plus then is a programme of electrifying our commuter rail network, and it's set out in a number of different sub-programmes. But the first part of that programme is actually purchasing fleet, because we wanted to build the capacity on our rail system, even while we're building the electrification of the network. So the procurement process for battery electric and fully electric fleet is almost complete now. The business case is also for the DART Plus programme is just about complete, and we'll go through this kind of the processes of approval hopefully this year. And the first of the planning applications, or the railway order applications for the DART West, which is the Maynooth line, we hope will go forward this year, later on this year as well. And then Bus Connects is also a transformational program, you know, in terms of the bus system, and not just bus, but cycling and walking and cycling on the key radial routes into the city and in around the city. And many people would certainly know what the objective of Bus Connects is, but I think we just need to focus on what we're trying to achieve, which is really radically improve the whole bus system from every aspect of it, in terms of the network, the fleet, and the priority that the bus achieves, so that it offers a much more attractive proposition for the people that live and work in Dublin, so that they can get to more places, and they can get there quicker. And it's just giving those options and encouraging more people to use both the bus system, but also alongside that, providing, you know, a significant amount of segregated cycling infrastructure as well. So there are the three mega projects. Bus Connects, then we had extensive consultation over the last 2 years in relation to Bus Connects and on all the key corridors, and we hope to be going again to planning on those on the infrastructure side later on this year, in around June or July of this year. So you can see a lot of planning work has taken place. This is a very significant year because a lot of those hopefully will be moving forward into the planning process, and then hopefully very, very quickly after that moving into construction. But at the same time, we've been building our capacity, building in on the Lewis side in terms of additional capacity on Lewis in terms of the Green Line enhancements. All that built-in capacity in terms of extra trams and the extensions of the existing trams is now in place. So when people come back to hopefully to travel the way they used to travel, they find that there's a lot more capacity there. We'll also have some diesel fleet coming into our commuter rail fleet, which again will build in some capacity until we get to the point where we're able to do the electrification. So it's all about building capacity. And on Bus Connects, the network, really, I suppose the COVID and the restrictions have delayed our implementation of the first of the spines in terms of delivery of a new network, and the H spine, which is the spine that serves Howth and the Howth Road into town. We hope, subject to the COVID restrictions being lifted, to implement that in and around the end of May, June. So that will be the start of the implementation of the Bus Connects network. And alongside that, then obviously we've given, we were delighted to be able to grant Dublin City Council 50 million towards all sustainable transport, walking and cycling projects right throughout the city. I mean, I think that's the largest amount we've been able to grant aid. We'd hope to see that increasing because the government is certainly dedicated to improve walking and cycling on a national basis. So this is the start, we think, of a very significant investment in walking and cycling infrastructure right throughout the city. And all those projects, which I'm sure Brendan will talk about, are at different stages in terms of planning and delivery. So,
and I'm gonna ask you, because we have questions coming in, and I'm gonna move on to Brendan in a sec, but just some of the questions in relation to what you mentioned on Bus Connects and COVID. Yeah. There's a question here from Connor. How has COVID impacted Metro North, Bus Connects, and Dart West? Is there? So you mentioned Bus Connect and how it impacted there. In relation to Metro North and Dart West.
It hasn't really impacted, other than, you know, there's obviously been a delay. We haven't been able to do the consultation in the format that we would normally be able to do. So it's probably delayed consultation a small bit, but the plans have continued to develop. So at this stage, we would have liked to be further on in terms of the planning process, but not by too much. You know, the delay has happened on actual implementation because we had hoped that we would have implemented the H spine this month, but you know, that work is just delayed, and it's only the fact that we're in level 5 restrictions that has held that back. You know, so that's really, in general, it hasn't, it's just delayed us in terms of consultation. Consultation has to be done virtually now, so you can't have as many meetings as you probably would like in the lead up to delivery it. But But other than that, the projects are still, from our point of view, are still going ahead, obviously subject to the government approving us to go to those steps, the next steps. They have to, because of the level of expenditure, the government has to approve us moving into a planning phase.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Brendan to give us a quick kind of roundup of his role and also of transport within Dublin City and Dublin City Council, and then we'll go straight into some of the questions back to you again, Anne. So, Brendan.
Okay, thanks, Lord Mayor, and thanks for the opportunity to spend the lunchtime chatting to yourself. So my role as you know, as head of the I suppose traffic department, public lighting, and a number of other items, it kind of broadly splits into about 3 different functions. So the first function is the operational function. So I suppose anybody on this webinar today interacts with the traffic department in multiple different ways as you go around the city. So whether it's the street lights, whether it's the traffic signals, whether it's crossing the road, whether it's using the bus going through traffic, these are all kind of things that operationally, you know, we've people who are constantly making sure that the people can move around the city, that it's safe, that the lights are on, the traffic signals are working. So there's a huge operational crew. We have a 24-hour 7-day-a-week control center who are constantly monitoring this, and it's the way we make sure that things operate as safely and efficiently as possible. So that's a key role. It's been a role for many years. We're the road authority. This is something that we need to do. We also work with the other local authorities around us as well, and we provide services them in the area of traffic management, also interfacing with TAI on the motorway network. So very much a greater Dublin area kind of look at that. So as I say, you know, when people set off for the journey in the morning, you know, whether it's walking, cycling, car, whatever, they're interacting with the traffic department, and the traffic department is there to assist. We also provide services such as school wardens, so you know, safety at schools, so school wardens, crossings, dealing with all the area questions that councillors have, and then the requests that come through both from the public and councillors for whether it's pay and display parking, whether it's double yellow lines, other safety measures, whether it's traffic signals and so on. So that's a really big part of what we do. And that's our interaction, you know, constantly with the various different area committees, the special policy committee, and so on of the city council, and that's a key element for us. The second thing then that I'm responsible for really is the DCC projects in the area of transportation. So these would be typically the walking and cycling projects. So things like the Clontarf to City Centre, Royal Canal Phase 2, Liffey Cycle Route, all of those particular projects. We have a project team under Chris Manzira, you know, and they're looking at and working on the more longer term projects. So that's a range of things. So as well as that, we have, you know, traffic controller upgrades, we have traffic signal upgrades, new pedestrian crossings, making sure all our crossings are up to mobility standards. So with the provision of facilities for visually impaired, mobility impaired, so on. We also then, as you mentioned, we you know, when COVID first struck and the city kind of emptied, it was kind of, I suppose most people had the same kind of experience of the city suddenly transforming from what was quite a busy city with a lot of congestion, a lot of people moving around, to being really, really empty. And it was kind of, then the question was, well, what do we do? What do we need to do? So we set up a COVID mobility team under Patricia Reedy, and they've been really working really hard over the last year on various different measures throughout the city, and also, you know, things such as you know, expanded footpaths at bus stops, additional space around various different locations for restaurants, and also then the various different cycle tracks. So we've either put in or protected around 20 kilometers of cycle tracks throughout the city. We've pioneered things like extruded curbs, you know, protection for cyclists. as I say, we've also pioneered how to do footpath extensions very, very quickly. You know, they will last about two to 3 years, but we can do them, you know, within a couple of days rather than previously we would have taken some considerable time to extend footpaths. So all of those measures, you know, working with the NTA through the sustainable grants and through the support the NTA have given us really on both funding and also their professional assistance in that program has been hugely you know, important. The school zones came out of that, you know, which you launched yourself, Lord Mayor, and they've been really, really popular and they've been quite significant. We've about 40 of them done. We're now seeing it as a national rollout. So the work that's been done by that team, by Antonio Martin, Patricia, and people like that have been really, really really important. And I suppose then the third strand really is the big projects that Anne mentioned, the Bus Connects, the Metrolink, the Dart Plus. So we have a team of people on Bus Connects. We've people who are you know, liaising with Bus Connects, liaising with Metrolink, liaising with Dart Plus. First of all, to bring in the various different departments in the city council. You know, everything from our you know, architects to our heritage, to our conservation, to the various planning departments, to drainage and so on, so that we have a combined response to these projects. And they're all massive projects, you know, and you know, mention them, but the combined weight of all those projects in terms of transport in Dublin will be completely transformational. And if we go back, you know, to 2010 or so, when we last had this range of projects where we had Metro North, where we had the Dart Underground, where we had Lewis,
Right there.
you know, that transformational element, you know, unfortunately got sidetracked by the economic downturn, so we more or less
Well,
lost
actually, can you
Hackett. But if you take it that we should have been really operating Metro North, the first passengers should have been in Metro North about 2016, 2017. And now we're in a situation where Metrolink is back on, and hopefully we'll see the passengers, you know, towards the end of the 20s. But there's no two ways about it. Dublin suffered a kind of a lost decade of investment in transportation. The fact that all these projects are here now is hugely exciting, and it's really, really good. It does challenge everybody. And Anne mentioned the 50 million that we got this year for our own projects from the NTA. And if you contrast that with, it's only 2 or 3 years ago when we were getting 6 or 7 million. So
Yeah,
it's a huge difference.
there's a huge difference in investment and funding. And I know I sound biased saying this, but I do think there's a lot being done by the Minister of Transport in terms of putting in jobs and putting in funding in the area at the moment nationally as well. I have a good few questions here, Brendan, and it may not come as a surprise to you, but someone, then Connor is asking, when is Booterstown to Sandymount cycle lane going to be ready? And someone else asking about Strand Road. So can you give us a quick recap on where Strand Road is at before I move to Anne in relation to Metro?
Yeah, sure. So as most people know, we had planned to implement Strand Road, the cycle track, the two-way cycle track on Strand Road on the 1st of March, or you know, close or change the road to one way and implement the cycle track. Unfortunately, we have a High Court challenge to that, and there was a stay granted, so that we had to stop work just the Friday beforehand. So where we are now is that the City Council has gone back to the High Court, has got an actual date for the hearing. So I think some people were confused. The judge at the time had said in late April the case would be reviewed again or whatever, but there was no date set for an actual hearing. So the City Council went back to the High Court and got a date for the hearing yesterday, which is the 24th of June, a 2-day hearing. So until that date, the actual stay is still in place. So we're not allowed to do any work on the scheme. The only works we did was to try and make it safe and change the speed limit down to 30 kilometers in that area, just to reflect the fact that we weren't finished the scheme. So we're hopeful, I suppose, that you know, come the actual case being heard at the end of June, that we get the result that we'd like to see, and that we can start to implement that, hopefully probably from early July. Unfortunately, because it's in the High Court, it's outside of our control, but that's what the current situation is.
Okay, one more question before I move to Anne. I did promise, because there will be difficult questions as well as easy one, is that Dara says, given the lack of consultation with the segregated bike lanes, when we return to normal traffic levels, when will we see one lane where there was previously? Given these areas were already congested, can you share the modeling for what you think will happen with traffic as we return to normal?
Oh, okay. So I'm not quite sure what they're actually referring to, because in the first instance, most of the cycle tracks that were already in place, and we protected them. We made them safer by segregating them. In a number of places, we put in segregated cycle tracks which weren't there before, such as Griffith Avenue, which went through our consultation hub. Strand Road went through the same process. So in a lot of places, there was existing cycle tracks which were not particularly segregated, or maybe not particularly continuous. So that was what was done. So turning to the second part about when traffic gets back to normal, I actually of the viewpoint that if people want traffic to go back to where it was previously and go back to normal, which was a congested situation which didn't suit most people, including car drivers, then that's fine. But what we're trying to do is to actually put in place a lot of measures which will mean that traffic doesn't go back to normal. That what actually happens is we have a different situation. We provide the facilities that people can safely use. We encourage people to use them. So for example, by putting in place the school zones, making it safer, making it easier for people to organize cycle buses, and working with schools to provide cycle parking and to provide that guidance. So we have employed 2 school outreach officers whose job it is to contact schools to work through their particular issues, to put in place these measures, to put in place what's needed. All of those add up to providing things that will make alternative uses of the city possible for people.
You and I have had this conversation time and time again this year, where there needs to be a modal shift when it comes to sustainable transport, where people do have that space in their mind where they think they can make that shift. And I look at school zones and I think that's the way that's the best way to do it, to provide people with better infrastructure so they can opt for a different version or option. So instead of just going right into the car. Anne, I have a question here from Michael. The planned Bus Connect's orbital connectivity in West Dublin seems underwhelming. Just one orbital bus route connecting Tala and Blanchardstown, considering these are huge population centres and we once had Metro West planned. Is the thinking they're involving in the NTA?
Well, I don't think it's underwhelming. Like, we went through a very significant consultation around the bus network, and we recognise that many people make orbital movements, don't want to come into the city centre and don't want to have to come into the city centre to make a journey out to a different part of the outskirts of Dublin. And we've reorganized the bus network so that there is not just an orbital on the outer orbitals, but also providing orbital movements both within the city centre as well. So around the kind of the South Circular, North Circular road, that'd be one circular orbital, so to provide opportunities for people to make much shorter trips and not have to come into the city centre. So we don't believe, we believe that the demand currently it can be supported by a bus system. If we find that the demand grows to the extent that, and that'll be some of the things that we'll be looking at in our review of the transport strategy, is that the demand exceeds what can be provided by bus system, well then you obviously look towards a light rail system, but currently in looking at the 20-year strategy that we had, up to 2035, the demand was not there for a light rail system on that orbital route, but that could change.
And in terms of demand, like Paul has a question here in terms of the resurgence of activity in urban villages, because we've seen this where there's a lot of movement around urban villages because people are sticking within that 5-kilometer zone. So like, is there more, is that taken into account in the Bus Connect strategy? Is there more provided for walking and outdoor and use bus priority signals to allow for less road and more pavement? For example, Fisborough Village was the example Paul gave here.
Yeah, like I think that's been a lot of the work that has taken place over the last 2 years, is looking at particularly, what can be done in our urban villages, where you want to provide for the public transport and public transport priority, but also need to provide for walking and cycling as well. So, a lot of those have come forward in the designs, particularly around the urban villages. But I think, we also need to reflect on what's going to change now post-COVID. What is how are people going to move around the city? Is there going to be the same level of demand to come into the city centre, into the central business district? There has been a focus, as we're working from home, on your local village and accessing that. So we believe that, and this is some of the things that we'll be testing for in the future in all our transport demand, and in looking at transport demand, is that we were likely to see a reduction in commuting trips into the central business district, but we could see a lot more local trips, such that that you will actually not get an overall reduction, or you could get a small reduction in overall trips. So I think there's going to be a reorganization about how people get around and where people want to go, particularly in relation to their work trips. So movement to your local village and in and around your local village is actually more important, or could become more important. And I think the Bus Connect network, the way it's redesigned now, where it's not just focused on radial movements, but also on your more orbital movements, will provide for that much more local trips and the shorter trips. And we're also then, in terms of the way we're structuring the fare system, by introducing a 90-minute fare, means that you'll be able to do multiple trips in 90 minutes and not get penalised every time you change from a bus, or even a bus to a Lewis, or even a Dart to a Lewis. So we're going to certainly, from later on this year, have it set up so that people can actually be able to do a lot more short trips, but not get penalised. So I think we're structuring it for the mobility of the future, and we've certainly taken into account the fact that people's mobility is probably going to change, but not significantly change, but will change a bit.
And there's an interesting question here about mental health and the transport strategy from Cormac here. Has that been built into the incoming? Because as we talk about COVID and talk about the resultant kind of negative effects coming from COVID, mental health being a big item, mental health, women's safety, has that all been embedded into a new strategy moving forward with the NTA?
Well, I'm not sure, because I saw this question coming up. So obviously, transport is about and is a derived demand. So it's really about, how people want to move and get access to the different services that they want to access, employment and education. So we provide the facility, for people to make that trip and make that trip safely around the city. So in terms of, I'm not sure about the mental health issue. Really, our issue is about making sure that we have as many services available for people to access the types of services that they want to access. In terms of safety, obviously that's crucial, in terms of public transport, and we want to ensure that customers feel safe when they're on a public transport system, and we're certainly reflecting on the report that was published, the TII's report about walking in women's shoes, and certainly we are reflecting on that in terms of how can we make the public transport system seem safer, and build up that perception of safety, so that we can see more women using public transport.
Yeah. And I think yourself and myself sit on the Nighttime Economy Task Force.
That's right.
And I have to say to audience here, Anne has been very good in trying to make sure to kind of apply that safety element in terms of transport, for workers in Nighttime Economy, for women, and she's been very focal in that part. I guess for the TII report recently, or at least the build up in relation to the Oireachtas kind of committees on transport, one of the points made by my colleague, actually, Janet Horner, was we need more women at the tables there, at the table to feed in to those reports and to be able to provide their point of view. I have a question here for Brendan next. The COVID mobility works are very welcome and have functionally transformed many parts of the city for the better. However, they are of temporary engineered nature with no aesthetic design input, with a negative impact on the historic core.
Okay, so if we I suppose look at that question in a number of different ways, they're quite right. You know, the COVID measures have had a functional impact on the city. And they've certainly been quite well received. You know, things like the filter permeability at Grange Gorman have certainly transformed the way people use that area. So of their nature, they were indeed temporary measures which were put in. You know, some of them put in at a time when there was real restrictions in the city. So all that we had was what we had in our stores, and now gradually we're starting to work to retrofit those. So there's a there's a project working with our architects and landscape architects to actually go back and actually look at how we can retrofit some of these. So some examples that people would have seen was you know, changing outside the forecourts to removing the plastic barriers, putting in quite nice planters and so on to quite transform that. We have a scheme which is a contraflow of Parnell Square, which is initially put in with bollards, but there's a whole planter scheme for that coming as well. And increasingly, as this has gone on, we've been able to harness resources from other departments. The point about you know, damaging the historic core, I'm not really sure what that's getting at, because first of all, you know, a lot of these are temporary interventions. They didn't damage anything. Secondly, there were interventions which were put in place to assist people at a particular time. The idea with this is that as we roll through the next say 5 years of the whole walking and cycling program, we will gradually move all of those interventions over into a much more suitable long-term implementation. But also, long-term projects take a lot of time to do. In the terms of the COVID and in terms of the situation we were faced with, you know, to start to do anything in a historic area of a permanent nature takes you a long time. So we've tried to balance that. As I say, we're coming back with schemes. We'll be back with schemes for, say, Griffith Avenue. As we're working our way through that scheme, we'll be starting to look at the first parts we did to replace the bollards with something far more suitable. And so those schemes will be coming out over the next while.
Okay, well, I noticed that outside the forecourts as well, that the temporary scheme was put into something a bit more aesthetically pleasing with planters. I have a question here from Kieran. There's actually lots of questions, folks. I'm going to try go through all of them, and apologies with the hand gestures as well. I'm in studio today to do hate crime conferences, so this is just a different location with people around. What are the barriers to introducing traffic light cameras to help with enforcement of red light braking? This is a chronic issue which happens despite the presence of school wardens at signal crossings. Is that one for yourself, Brendan, or Anne?
It's probably for both of us. You know, the Dublin City Council put in 2 red light cameras over the last while. And just to explain, the red light camera system is linked to the Garda back office system, so it requires consent from the commissioner, the Garda commissioner. It also requires an agency to operate them. So we were responsible for putting them in, commissioning them, getting them working. Initially TII, and then subsequently the NTA took the role of the operational authority, which is the one that signs the agreement with the commissioner of the Gardaí. And I know the NTA have been working on starting to move some of those into a different area of legislation, which is something we'd really like to see. So, Anne, if you want to.
Yeah, so I mean, it's part of the Bus Connects project as well, particularly looking at the infrastructure where there's going to be, turning bans and, different interventions that certainly the residents of those areas are concerned about, what level of enforcement will be applied to those. So we're engaged with our parent Department of Transport, on looking to see, can we put in place camera enforcement, or can the state put in place camera enforcement related to those kind of turning bans, but also access into bus lanes. When you're spending significant funding to put in place the infrastructure for bus and for cycling, you don't want that to be abused. So obviously you want to have a rigorous enforcement in place to ensure that they are being used by the appropriate mode. So it's under active consideration at the moment, is what should be the enforcement associated with those kind of traffic offences, and engaged in that are the Department of Transport, and of course on Garda Síochána as well. And we will see what comes out of those discussions. But
actually, and it's funny because we have Paula Hillman here. I have her with me in about 15 minutes to talk about hate crime and protecting our people. And one of the conversation I spoke with Paula about was putting cameras on Dublin bus to capture any of the rule breaking on bus lanes. So I think this is an ongoing conversation that seems to be happening. So
Yeah.
I guess what the questioner is proposing is that if it can happen quicker, that would be great. So it is the general team.
Yeah.
On the NTA, Dara here, the NTA CPO'd a large number of buildings around Quinns in 2007/8, where the metro was supposed to be originally built. Those buildings are still being rented and used and are now not part of the metro plan. What is going to happen with these buildings given the change to the metro route?
Well, actually, we didn't CPO those properties. That would have been the Railway Procurement Agency at that time, which is now part of Transport Infrastructure Ireland. They were merged together with the NRA. So those properties are in their ownership. They're not in our ownership. So I can't really comment on there, because I don't have the details about those properties at the moment.
No, that's absolutely okay. And this is the thing. There are some of the questions you may not have answers for. So I'm trying to cover as many as possible. There was one, if I saw earlier on, from John, who was a fan of yours, Brendan, saying you did great work with COVID mobility and transport in the city. But he had a question in relation to congestion and car blocking on the Hackett Bridge, if I'm not incorrect. I'm trying to find it back, but it is about the congestion on the bridge.
On the Rosie Hackett Bridge?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so the Rosie Hackett Bridge is a public transport bridge only. I don't know whether he's referring to the issues maybe on the South Quays where the public Lewis and the bus service are trying to make their way off the bridge, and where there's a yellow box there which periodically can get blocked. So I suppose it kind of goes back to what Anne was saying. I mean, the City Council would very much welcome the additional enforcement tools, whether that's yellow box enforcement tools or a red light running and bus lane enforcement, because as we roll through this whole walking cycling projects, and also as we go through the bus connects, we absolutely need to make sure that the investment is protected. So there was mention earlier about the fact that bus connects in some places have been redesigned to be more I suppose flexible, take less property away, work on traffic signals, work on turn bans, work on all those kind of things, and that brings the City Council fully into that, because that's how we'll be managing those corridors once they've been completed. But in order to do that, we need the tools, and relying on manual enforcement of bus lanes is not going to work. So we'd very much see that, and the same with yellow box blocking. So somebody who drives onto the yellow box there at Rosie Hackett delays a Lewis.
It was Berkey, at Rosie Hackett.
That's exactly it. So we put in place the statutory instruments. We put in place the yellow box. We put in place the traffic signals. We put in place the fact that you're not allowed to enter a yellow box, unless your way is clear. And when people ignore that and block public transport, that's quite annoying for everybody on the public transport operators and so on. And it's an example of people not not driving to the rules of the road. So, you know, in order to counteract that, and as I say, as we go through this whole Bus Connects project, there'll be multiple areas like this. So we do need that better level of enforcement. So it is a frustration to ourselves, but they're the tools that we put in place. The enforcement of those is not ours at the moment. It's not the NTA's either at the moment. So that's probably where the frustration comes from.
We may actually end up coming back for another session if we have more time during these Chu Chats sessions to bring in. We will be talking to Paula actually and Anne about safety in the city, so we might bring it in then. But we may also bring in Ray Coyne. I really wanted him to actually come to this session. So sorry, I think I myself hadn't reached out properly. On that note, I'm really sorry that we had to that we started this session late, and we're now going to have to finish early as well. We're moving on to how to tackle hate crime and protect our people seminar, moving in from with Irish Network Against Racism. So apologies to everyone coming in to ask all your questions. I asked as many as possible. There will be others that if you can send in to Lord Mayor at dublincity.ie, that would be great. The others that we find here, if it's not been answered live, we will try to get back to if you send it to us at lordmayor at dublincity.ie. My thanks to Anne Graham and to Brendan and Brian. I know we could have done this for another good hour if possible, actually, with the amount of questions coming in. So thank you so much, everyone, and apologies for the technical difficulties. And we may actually revisit the transport piece again in the next coming weeks. Thanks a million. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Lord Mayor.
Thanks. Bye-bye.